Many world leaders have welcomed a UN Security Council resolution which demands an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during the remainder of Ramadan. It also calls for the unconditional release of captives and unrestricted access to desperately needed aid. Now, in response to the resolution, Israeli officials canceled a trip to Washington in protest against the U.S. failing to use its veto. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office issued a statement saying that U.S. actions were a clear departure from its consistent position since the beginning of the war. The statement says the resolution gives Hamas hope that international pressure will force Israel to accept a ceasefire without the release of the Israeli captives held in Gaza. Israel may have canceled that delegation visit to the U.S., but its Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, was already in Washington, and he's holding separate talks with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Al Jazeera's White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, has more from Washington, D.C.
The White House is calling the decision by the Israelis to cancel a meeting with U.S. officials later in the week disappointing. The meeting was designed to discuss Israeli campaign plans into Rafah and whether or not there could be alternatives. The State Department saying that there was a fear that there could be undue civilian harm. Also, the belief that the Biden administration feels that this could reduce Israel's standing in the world and, as a result, undermine its security. Well, ahead of another meeting taking place on Monday, the Israeli Defence Minister spoke to reporters ahead of his meeting with the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, saying that he felt that the actions of the United States at the UN Security Council were certainly not supportive of Israel, and as a result, he issued this thinly veiled threat. Take a listen.
We have no moral right to stop the war in Gaza until we return all the hostages home. If we do not reach a clear decision in Gaza, it may bring us closer to war in the north. I will stress the importance of destroying Hamas and returning the hostages home. We will operate against Hamas everywhere, including in places where we have not yet been.
Now, White House Security Council spokesperson John Kirby has countered the argument by Israel also that there has been a shift in policy as a result of the United States abstaining on this latest UN Security Council resolution as opposed to vetoing, as has been seen in the past. In fact, Kirby saying that this is not a reflection of a shift in policy. Instead, the United States saying that it wanted to get to a place where it would see a clear condemnation of Hamas and its actions on October 7th. And given that they could not get that language, this was a resolution the United States says it could not support. Kimberly, Halkett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Imran Khan in occupied East Jerusalem joins us now. Imran, let's wrap up this Israeli response to the United Nations Security Council resolution. They've said it's not going to impact how we conduct this war. They seem to be basically ignoring it and pretending that it hasn't happened.
Well, that's actually completely consistent for Israeli policy. Remember, there's been about 148 UN resolutions since 2015. Israel's ignored every single one of them. It's very good at ignoring all of those resolutions. In fact, it has a spin on this, calling the UN anti-Semitic at worst and anti-Israel at best. So it can ignore all of this. This is much more difficult for Israel to ignore because of the US's role in all of this. We've unpacked a lot of that already. But let me just remind you, the fact that the US abstained rather than veto is what's driving the anger from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his allies here in Israel. He is saying very clearly that this administration is trying to stop Netanyahu from carrying out the war the way he wants to be able to carry it out. Now, that's something that is driven a wedge between them. The UN resolution, it is binding, it is international law, but Israel can ignore it because it still has the key support of the US, $3.5 billion a year in military assistance alone. That money hasn't been threatened. So there is a rift in the relationship, there is a public-facing rift in that US relationship, but backstage, where it counts, the money, that's still coming.
Imran, I wonder, are you able to get a sense of how this is all playing out with the Israeli public? Because this is another show of Israel's isolation on the international stage?
Well, let's take the media for an example. Normally, the Israeli media is very divided, hard right and a very small liberal left kind of media. Very divided on all of the issues. They're actually united in talking about the fact that there may well be a rift in the US-Israeli relationship, and that's indeed worrying the public. Because it's not just Joe Biden. The former US President, Donald Trump, has criticized Israel as well, saying Israel needs to stop its war in Gaza. There was a calculus that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have had in the back of his head. He knows there's an election coming up in the US. If he sticks to his guns with Biden, maybe the next administration may well change its position on Israel's actions in Gaza. That doesn't look like it's happening. President Donald Trump has been very clear. That might just be electioneering. But all of this has an impact. Does it change the public support for the war? No, it doesn't. That's still pretty high. But this idea, this notion that they can go into Rafah with this ground offensive without any kind of international opposition, that's now going away. The US has been very clear, and that vote of abstention from the US is the clearest signal yet that it's not a green light to go into Rafah with a massive ground invasion.
Imran Khan reporting from occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Imran.